All right, guys. Another massacre unfolded in Gaza today. The IDF killed at least 100 people, starving Gazans as they were trying to get food. You told me that the injured number is as high as 1,000.
Yeah, the range at this point is somewhere between 100 and 150 killed, and somewhere between 700 and 1,000 injured.
So give me the what they say happened, right? Like,
Who's they?
there were three different stories that the IDF put out.
Yeah,
which of course is like evidence of you're fucking lying about all of it.
So first of all, what we know happened, because we have video from the ground, is that obviously you have a population that is starving, in some cases literally starving to death at this point. Very limited food aid coming in, especially to northern Gaza. So you had thousands of Palestinians waiting for these expected food trucks to arrive. When they did arrive, they rushed up to try to get this food, and Israeli forces began firing on them. And I mean, it's just an absolute bloodbath. So
they don't even try to claim like, oh, Hamas shot at us from the crowd.
So no,
bro.
That's what I just told you is what actually happened.
Okay.
What the IDF is saying, they immediately released this video, which, first of all, it's taken from a drone or something up high, and you're looking down, and they sort of intentionally make it look like these human beings who are trying to get this food from the truck are like insect-like. And their initial story was, oh, they swarmed this truck and then they all trampled each other. Bullshit. Because again, we have the video of the IDF firing on them. Then another story was that they felt threatened by these starving Gazans, and so fired some warning shots. And then the food truck drivers drove away and ran over a bunch of Palestinians.
And that was a total lie.
Also a lie. And then the third version of the story is actually it was Hamas. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm at the point now, I don't even know what to say about this stuff anymore. Because it's like, it's like rewind and hit play, and it's every day it's another massacre, totally genocidal. They keep getting away with it. There are no consequences. The U.S. keeps sending them money and weapons, no matter what they do. We were just watching the press conference with that slimy little weasel, whatever his name is,
Miller.
the State Department guy.
Yeah.
And it's all, it's deflect and obfuscate and but Hamas. And it's like, we're at 39,000 dead Palestinians now. About 35,000 of them are civilians. Over 14,000 dead kids. Are they literally going to butt Hamas themselves over like 100K civilian deaths? Over 200K civilian deaths? They're butt Hamasing at a time when 70% of the humanitarian aid that goes into Gaza is blocked. And that's an old fact from about a month or so ago. But my understanding is that even since the ICJ said it was plausible that Israel is committing genocide, that hasn't changed for the better. If anything has changed for the worse.
No, it's gotten worse.
Yeah, they're blocking more of the humanitarian aid from getting in.
The number of trucks has fallen by my recollection, if recollection serves, roughly 1/3. Since the ICJ said you have to increase the amount of humanitarian aid go in. We have seen not only the immediate cut off of funding to UNRWA by the United States, and then followed by a number of other countries based on literally no evidence. So that was the number one aid organization on the ground. We've seen that. We've also seen now weeks of these protests of a bunch of psycho Israelis erecting bouncy castles and blocking aid from coming in, while the IDF and the Israeli police just stand by and let it happen. Meanwhile, when you have protesters for a ceasefire in Tel Aviv, their skulls are cracked and water cannon shot at them, etc. So very clear what the Israeli government policy is. It's annihilation, it's collective punishment, it's starvation. And the U.S. is not just standing by and letting this happen. We are actively engaged in furthering those genocidal aims, both through the cutting of funding, from providing diplomatic cover at the ICJ and at the UN for continued Israeli atrocities, and of course, by shipping the weapons that are used to attack and kill children, women and now starving Gazans who are trying to get food to eat, you know, who are absolutely desperate trying to get food to eat for themselves and their families.
What's amazing is that when you think of the moral angle of foreign policy, everybody knows, like, yeah, that's not the primary thing that drives our foreign policy decisions. But I think everybody felt intuitively there is some floor, there is some bottom, or if, you know, the moral angle becomes way too obvious and way too clear and our allies are crossing giant bright red lines, or that at some point it's like, all right, we got to go ahead and reel this in a little bit. Turns out that's not true. Yeah. Turns out you could just do like Nazi-style atrocities, and if you're on the good side of the United States of America, it's like, hey, rock on, man. We'll deflect for you. We'll obfuscate for you. We'll go right along with all the bullshit.
We'll fund it. We'll back it.
Now, by the way, you know, you might be thinking, well, at least we have a media to call this stuff out. Call a spade a spade. Man, these headlines over what happened in Gaza, this massacre that the IDF committed in Gaza, just to give you some examples here. So Voice of America, here's their headline. More than 100 Palestinians are killed during Gaza food distribution. Remember, like, more than half of the people only read the headline. More than 100 Palestinians are killed. Who killed them? Mm-hmm. Anything to say about that? Forbes, more than 100 Palestinians killed while waiting for food in Gaza, Health Ministry says. So now it's not a fact, it's, well, the Gaza Health Ministry says.
Yeah, at least we didn't get the Hamas-affiliated health ministry, which is probably what it says in the article.
Here we have the Associated Press. Gaza's health ministry says at least 70 people were killed and 280 wounded in a strike on a crowd of Palestinians waiting for humanitarian aid. Again, no mention of the IDF.
The strike.
No mention of that. CNN breaking news. This was at least 100 killed and 700 injured in chaotic incident where IDF opened fire as people waited for food in Gaza, Palestinian officials say. So this goes back to that Intercept study that we talked about, where when it's violence done to Israeli civilians, the language is crystal clear. This was an atrocity, this was terrorism, this was a slaughter, this was a massacre, very clear, like brute force language. When you flip the script and it's violence done to Palestinian civilians on purpose, by the way, on purpose, they'll never admit the on purpose part, but when it's done to Palestinian civilians, it's all passive language. It's all like, an incident happened, a blast occurred. Oh, a blast occurred. Well, I guess the blast better stop that then. Like, what are we doing here? Like, the bias is so grotesque. It's dripping out of every pore and every orifice of our media apparatus and our political establishment. And by the way, this is why your segment blew up on Nat Schwartz, the New York Times. And people are now calling, and I saw this on Twitter, people were saying it's like a Judith Miller level scandal.
Yeah.
Where she was lying about the Iraq War and lying us into the Iraq War.
Yeah.
They're doing the same shit where they're building the intellectual framework for genocide. When they say, oh, systemic rape was happening, against Israeli civilians on October 7th. Turns out it was totally fabricated. It was totally fabricated. And everybody went along with it. And then now when you scratch beneath the surface, it's like, holy shit, they went to every hospital and every rape crisis center in Israel and found no evidence and then ran with the story anyway. And one of the people they based the story on came out and said, you guys totally misstated it. That's not what the fuck I said.
Yeah, and two of the reporters, I use that term very loosely here.
Right, yeah.
One
Propagandists.
of them, Anat Schwartz, had literally never worked in journalism until she gets this plum gig at the New York Times. Think of how many established journalists worked their entire careers to get a New York Times byline. She had never written a single piece before November for the New York Times, and she gets put on this incredibly sensitive investigation. Prior to that, she had been a filmmaker. Prior to that, she had been an IDF soldier in an intelligence unit. Her nephew was also on the piece. He had slightly more experience. Apparently, he had penned a few articles about food and cooking. And those were the two that were the lead, quote-unquote, investigators on the ground. She gave an interview. Kudos to Ryan Grimm and The Intercept and Jeremy Scahill, and I think it was Daniel Boguslaw as a third byline on this piece today. They unearthed this Hebrew language interview she gave about the process. And it's very clear that she decided this event happened and that she was going to somehow come up with enough to justify that conclusion no matter what. And so when she's going to all these places and she's not finding any evidence of rape, she never has the thought of, well, maybe it didn't occur. Instead, it's, oh, well, the hospitals they probably just don't want to talk about it. Oh, there's nobody willing to come forward because probably all the women who were raped were killed. Oh, there's no forensic evidence because of Jewish burial rituals. Oh, the crisis centers don't want to talk because of patient confidentiality, and ends up basing the whole thing basically on like the word of Israeli officials and, these Zaka people who fabricated the beheaded baby story. One supposed eyewitness who changed the story multiple times. The whole thing is, it's beyond thin. It's just debunked at this point. So in the New York Times, their response was and by the way, this woman had liked literal genocidal posts on Twitter before she gets hired by the New York Times. Now, their response isn't to fire the editors who put her on the story and greenlit this thing and do a whole investigation of how the hell this happened. No, their response is to investigate the leakers who gave this information to Ryan and co. at The Intercept. That's their response to this. It's just like, you literally can't make any of this up. Blatant.
However bad you thought it was, it's way, way worse. These are lying propagandists. That's what they are. Paper of record, my ass cheeks. Okay? There's more integrity and honesty in a fart of mine and yours than there is in the entirety of the fucking New York Times. So, there's a lot more we can say, but we'll cut it off there.
Yeah, it's sick. It's just sick.
Unacceptable. And what are you going to do, Joe Biden? What are you going to do? You're going to cut off the money? You're going to cut off the weapons? You're going to sanction them? You're going to condemn them at the UN? You're going to do fucking anything? Anything? I think you all know the answer to that. It's not a good answer, but I think you know what it is. Pathetic.